Welcome to the fifth lesson of choral studies. Just a reminder for you all students who did not have experienced the lessons before, please check them out because every single lesson is important. So by this week, we should have finalized the list of the student of this course. So if you were not joining at the beginning, so please check them. They are all available on iSpace. So today, the first thing we talk about singing concept is the keys and your range. That's why we have been talking about the keyboard every time as a singer. For you who are especially interested in singing solos, you must carefully select the keys of your range because that's one of the biggest misunderstandings out there. So you must know exactly the range of each tune, each song. So let's explain it through the keyboard. The key of a tune is very crucial for all singers. We take a very simple example of Happy Birthday tune. Everyone knows that. Actually, it's not that simple because you can see, literally, I've already played a range of an octave. There are 8 notes already, so it's not a narrow range at all. For most of the people, you may feel actually it is quite low because it's in key of C. So you may want to transpose that. Transpose means playing the same melody on a different key. Of course, this matters to music theory, but just neglect it first. So I'm playing this very same melody on the key of E flat. You can tell we are singing in a higher pitch, right? And very same thing, we just transpose it to a higher key. And very same, we experience an octave also. So how about another key? How about one more? So how do you feel? Some people may think the last key fits him or her better, the most. Or some people think somewhere in between is better. So it really depends on your own voice and range. Because the range of different tunes are different, so it has to be considered very carefully. So let's have another example of Mary Had a Little Lamb. So if just now you sang with me, you find it very easy to sing because this range is still in the key of C, but with a more narrow range. Instead of going down like just now in the Happy Birthday tune, you find it the key of C is very good for this tune. So it proves that you have to be very careful on considering the key of every tune. And what I want to point out is the key of every tune you sing should be carefully selected. Back to the example of this Happy Birthday song, is not due to the key of C, because every melody can be played in every octave, like this. Instead of adding the fact that the voice of a grown-up man is an octave lower than that of female and children. So the key doesn't count, I would say. But what happened just now is because in the lower octave, we encounter this range below the middle C. So back to the middle C here. I would say this note should be comfortable for all of the people generally. So when notes go lower than middle C, everyone should feel low. Of course, if you are baritone, if you are bass, if you are a alto singer, you may feel more easy, and maybe that's where your tone comes from, the chest voice and all these lower tones. So you must know where this range covers on the keyboard, so you can have an idea which key you'll feel most comfortable. Like me, I'm a baritone. I would say I'll generally like a range around here because this is somewhere not too low and not too high, where I'm good at. If you're a soprano or tenor, you may like somewhere range like here. So this is a very general and basic concept. So now I hope you have a more clear idea about mapping the range of each song to your own register, because by visualizing on the keyboard, you know exactly where they are. Of course, you don't always need to have a sheet of music. Of course, it's better and more convenient if you do. If you don't have, it's all right. Just try to catch the highest pitch and the lowest pitch of the very song and map it on the piano. Then you kind of have an idea of where it goes. So the misunderstanding I mentioned just now was there's many people think that the singing in a higher key, the better singer you are. And this is quite wrong because everyone is so different. They have different register, they have a different timbre, which means tone, and different passaggio, as I mentioned in the previous lesson. So it was totally a personal choice on how you can interpret and express that very song in your best way. So I would say most of the time, you should choose a song's key according to your register that you have some opportunities to express your best. Okay, so the best means maybe you are very good at your head voice. So you may want some notes to express it, but not the whole tune. So you don't want to choose a key at your high register, which is only the head voice, or you don't want to be so lazy, so-called lazy, to choose a very low key that you never reach a passaggio, which means the transition to a head voice. So it doesn't make sense at all. So just a very general rule, you should have some point in the song that kind of reach your passaggio and have more expression on that, because you know the tension is so different. And this is a very general recommendation. Of course, it really refers to each particular song and the particular story it is telling and the version you want to make. I think this is also one very interesting topic to talk about especially performing arts. Not many people have this idea that there's both subjective and objective issues in art, because people think art is just subjective. I won't argue with that, because when it comes to aesthetics, it comes to your culture, it comes to your values, whatever, a lot of factors that affect that. So I'm not going to argue that, but we are going to talk about the objective factors like music. So something is absolute, like pitch, like rhythm, like harmony. That's worldwide. When you sing the same tune, you can sing everywhere in the world. If you have the same piece of music, it can be played everywhere in the world. And of course, that aesthetic aspect is subjective in a way. So for Mozart, sonata, whatever, that has been existing for 300 years or so, you see thousands of versions, but you recognize that's the same piece of music. And of course, there's elasticity in it. So that's the objective, that's the subjective issue on how you want to interpret it. So this is the very magic of performing arts. So last week, you have already got the first assignment, which is the singing assignment. Uh, there was example video, but frankly, I think the tempo is a little bit slow and it's not easy to be sung. So I make you another tempo, which is a little bit faster and should be not that slow. And for you, because there are different voices out there in you all students, I have made you three keys. The original key is in C, which is kind of mid-high for most of the people, but not everyone is very comfortable with it. So I transpose it. Transpose means moving the whole tune to a lower and a higher key, just like what we mentioned just now on the keyboard. So I transpose it to B major and B flat major. So two lower keys for you. So you just choose the one you're more comfortable with. Any key, no problem. You may try back and forth to find out which key exactly you feel comfortable. Because this very melody is not easy at all, because we mentioned that it's over an octave. Only the first phrase is over an octave already. So you carefully choose your key. And I think this tempo is very practical and workable. So let's make it simple and focus on the keys. So this is not something you have to record and do and hand in a short while. So take your time. And of course, by every lesson, I'm going to introduce you more singing concepts in different aspects. So you learn by learning more, and you have more experience on practicing this very tune. But because you need time to practice, so I have already delivered you through email, because on the iSpace, I think there's issues, students cannot download the MP3. So by this time, you should have your at least 6 MP3s, because there are two versions of each key, one with the vocal melody and one without. So you have to practice with both, and when you hand in your assignment, you have to record and sing with the version without the vocal melody in the MP3, just the piano. So you need to practice with this. So there are 6 files in 3 keys totally. So if you haven't received your MP3s in the email, please let me know through email or on iSpace, no problem, because every lesson I made a forum. So just post in the forum, this is the best way. And of course, email does reach me too. So if you don't have your email in hand, no problem, just reach me in iSpace. Today we are going to talk about early classical music. In a general sense, the repertoire of classical music kind of start like at the period of Bach, which is kind of late 18th century, and it ends about late 19th and maybe early 20th century. Technically, it's within 300 years of time. And of course, history is much longer than that. And today we focus on Baroque music and religious music. It sounds very academic, scary, boring. I try to make it easy. So this is maybe something very unfamiliar with most of the students, but it's a very good way to know and a little peek into the Western history, I would say. So there are several things that may interest you. So the first thing is some early instruments, because not all the instruments were invented in the same time. So it came by the development of technology and so on, and especially the Industrial Revolution in Europe after the Renaissance, some centuries after the Renaissance, I think. So all things are so connected. All these historical factors matters, of course. So the first thing I want to introduce you is a harpsichord. Harpsichord, it's so-called the previous version of piano, but technically it's not. Because piano, what means by piano in musical terms, piano means soft, and loud means forte. So the whole name of piano is forte piano, which means an instrument capable to play both loudly and softly. So harpsichord is not like that. Why piano can play both loudly and softly? Because pianos, there are 88 keys, as you saw on any other keyboard. Acoustic piano, a real piano, they are all made of metal, a very big metal plate, whatever you call it, a body, and each note there should be 1 to 3 strings, metallic strings. I'm not sure about the material, maybe steel, whatever. So 1 to 3 metallic strings, and they're played by hammers. So every time you play a note, there's a hammer hitting the strings, and that's it. That's why you can hit it hardly, you can hit it softly. So that's the basic way of how piano works. But the harpsichord is not like that. There's a little pick, little flip, whatever it is called. Basically, it just kind of play the strings like guitar. You just play through it. It just like this, and it was made by the what is it, the bones of the wings of some kind of birds. So it's kind of not that hard. It's kind of elastic. So that's what I heard of. Of course, nowadays they still make this instrument, and it's kind of made in plastic, which is kind of both hard and elastic. For sure, it's not a hammer. So it's just play through this, like playing a guitar. So it's just idea. So piano is hitting the string. So it's a totally different concept. And that's why the harpsichord can only play with one dynamic, basically. So it's only hitting the string a little bit faster or a little bit slower. And this is one very particular instrument you have to learn. Of course, if you do learn keyboard, you know where exactly the notes are. But the language, it's a little bit different than those from piano. So let's take a look. This one is a very one of the early compositions by I think is French composer, and the title is Les Cyclopes. So it comes from the Greek mythology or Roman mythology. I'm not sure. It's about the one-eyed giant named Cyclops, and it goes to number 1. Okay, so this is the real thing of this lesson. We're talking about Mass. Mass in Chinese is 弥撒。弥撒就是教会每个礼拜天聚会的时候举行的。Okay, Mass is kind of a Catholic Church thing. I'm not going to argue with that because it's a whole bunch of doctoral degree arguing on this religious stuff. Okay, so of course there's been a lot of changes in the church in the European history. So we're not going to dig that deep. In the Mass, there's of course different sections, different parts. Usually a Mass lasts for at least an hour, maybe 2 to 3 hours, depends on the date and the ceremony it is going to conduct. But there are 5 parts called the ordinary that is always kept. You must fulfill that. And the other parts may not, because every week it goes on. And of course, not only every week, if it is the Christmas, if it's Easter, if it's some other kind of ceremony, they also have Mass. Okay, so this is one very simple idea. There are 5 parts. And I also have attached you the, not the lyrics, what it is called, the text. Yeah, it should be the text. It's in Latin. So nowadays, Latin is not really a very lively language, but it still exists, of course. And nowadays, when we sing the Latin language, basically, we follow the Italian pronunciation. It's very simple, just R, A, E, O, U. And you'll find it very simple. And you can really pronounce that by yourself, following these simple rules. And this just that basically like all the other syllables. So on the right, you can see the English translation, and this sometimes may be able to be sung directly because there are so many different languages in the world, and the church has been establishing in different parts of the world. So local languages are acceptable to be sung in Mass as well. So now we stick with English. So the first part is called Kyrie. Kyrie is the first time, not the first time, the kind of the first part of the Mass, because in the religion or Christian, Catholic, or whatever, so the first time is you have to kind of wash out your sin because we normal people, we commit sins, kind of big or small, in every aspect of daily life. So the first thing when you go to the Mass, you have to ask for forgiveness. So that's the first thing you ask for. So there are three phrases only. Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. Just that. And the number three in the Christian church is very important because it matters to the whole idea of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If you are not exposed to this, it's no problem. Just let you know. The number of three is very important in church. So this is the first the first part of the Mass. So many composers write Mass because, as mentioned, this is very important of the European history. So one very big composer who writes a lot of religious work is Bach. So he wrote several important Mass, and one of the most famous is the Mass in B minor. So BWV 232. Okay, so we exposed to the term opus in 2 or 3 lessons previously. Also, different, most of the time, I would say most of the time, opus comes from Latin. Opus, opus means works. So like a composer have written 100 works in his whole life. So people categorize them in opus by time usually. Okay, this is opus 1 is an orchestral work, opus 2 is a chamber work, whatever. So, but there are some different naming system for particular composer. Like for Bach is BWV. It's in German. Basically, it literally means the Bach's work. B means for Bach. W is Werk in German, which means work. So it's something like this. So let's listen to music. This is the first part, and it goes to number 2. So in this version, you have seen the orchestra a little bit smaller, and the instruments are different. More wooden instruments, and you also see the harpsichord there. And this generally called the Baroque instruments because they were before the industrial revolution in Europe. So there was not that much metal around. So instruments were mainly crafted by wood, in wood, I would say. And this is something very different because the whole structure is different, the whole sound is different, much softer, like the bows of string instrument, like the violins you see. Maybe it doesn't look very different from the modern violin, but they sound very different. One of the things is that they use gut strings instead of metallic strings. Gut means the 长枝，用什么？用山羊，这是真的，就是这个 like the tissue of the guts, and they round it, and then it makes the strings because there was not much metal around. So they use animal guts, and like the bows, the structure is a little bit different. So the sound is very different. So there's something you may hear the difference. So now go to the second part of the Mass, is Gloria. So if you're a believer, you always praise the Lord. So this is basically the second part. Of course, it's not a very short passage, but not the longest yet. So it comes to another composer I want to introduce you. He is Vivaldi, also kind of early. He is a composer from the late 18th century, I believe, and one of his most famous work is the Four Seasons Violin Concerto. So check them out. Four Seasons Violin Concerto is one of the most famous work of Vivaldi, and this Gloria also. So another issue I want you to know is not all the composers write the whole mass. Like this work is kind of long. Why? Because Vivaldi set each phrase of the lyrics into music. And Vivaldi, this Gloria is one single isolated work of him. That's why it's so long, because every single phrase is a section of music or a movement, whatever you call it. And that's why, because there were like 20-ish sections, so the music is that long. And I hope you to go through it because I'm not going to make any exercise or assignments in this lesson. So I want you to spend time to listen to music, because there's the choir, a soloist, and no matter you want to stick with the lyrics or not, listen to the sound, listen to the form it performs, go through it. That's why I am uploading all these videos instead of doing live, because sometimes a work in a longer extension is not easily to be digested in one go. Me too, nowadays, I cannot really sit down and listen the whole symphony. It's impossible for me. So take your time, listen slowly or gradually, even in sections, no problem. But I hope you to go through at least once, the whole thing, to hear how music is appreciated and how music is experienced when it comes to this kind of volume. Like last lesson, you experienced Beethoven's Ninth Symphony also, and that's only the very last part of the symphony. It was like 20 minutes time something, and this is very important experience. You may not have experienced any other classical music in your whole life later on, but at least in this very lesson you have this experience, and this is one of the most important thing of the course. You need to know how exactly it feels, because music is to be appreciated no matter it's in 3 minutes or in 30 minutes or 60 minutes or so. And considering this, I advise you to go slowly. And if you are very interested, better. If not, no problem, just go sections by sections. So this goes to number 3. I think this is a very nice version, isn't it? I enjoyed this very much, actually, this Vivaldi one. So coming on is the longest text in the Mass. It's called the Credo. Credo in English is to believe. So you can see the whole text in the material. And why it is so long? Because it basically tells a story. If you're not exposed to this Christian culture, please take a look, because this is the whole core of Christianity, I would say, of the whole religion. The concept is God, the Father, sent His Son Jesus to the world, and you probably know that. And the whole thing is He sacrificed for man. That's why people seen are washed, are released. So this is the whole thing. Jesus died for human. So this is the whole thing. So every time in the Mass, people have to go across this text and remind themselves about this very particular part of the story or the history, whatever you call it. So this is Mass by Mozart. Mozart also write several important Mass. This is one in C minor. So for Mozart, they use KV. So this is a particular term for Mozart's work. They basically don't use opus. They usually stick with KV. And for this very version, you'll see boy choirs again as we introduced, and it's a very nice version. And you can have a look on how it goes in a Mozart version, because Mozart is later than Bach and Vivaldi. The whole orchestra is bigger and kind of starting to use so-called modern instruments, so the sound is different. Of course, this is a modern version, but even in his time, they started to use this kind because it's kind of in a transition period, and the idea is just different. So this is Mozart, and it goes to number 4. So now we go to the fourth part of the Mass. It's called Sanctus. Sanctus is holy. And there are all variations around that, but we're not talking about this. So this is the fourth part. Again, it's kind of to praise the Lord. And we go into this version by Verdi. We always see Verdi in this course. He's a very important composer on vocal music. He writes a lot of very important opera, and his use of chorus is just so many. And this sound is so different because Verdi is already stepping in the 19th century, and so-called modern instruments are used, and the sound is always huge. The style of Verdi is just spectacular and always big, and so it's kind of dramatic sound for religious work, and it goes to Sanctus. And another term I have to introduce to you is Requiem. Requiem in Chinese is 安魂曲. 安魂曲, actually it comes from a mass for the dead. So when people die, they also hold a mass. So these 5 ordinaries are kept except Credo, I think. I forgot. Anyway, Requiem is originally a mass and is a mass for the dead. So please be really careful on this. And some composers set this text on Requiem, and Verdi sets one of the most famous. Is one of the most famous Requiem around. So this goes to number 5. So now we come to the final section of the Mass. It's called Agnus Dei. Agnus Dei, again, we are back to the core of the religion, which is the sacrifice of Jesus. So it's the ending of the Mass. So they always call Jesus the Lamb of God because he sacrificed himself. This particular version is not originally for Mass, actually. This is an American composer called Samuel Barber. Barber is very famous for his instrumental works, and one of his most prominent work is called Adagio for Strings. It was a work for strings and strings only. Very beautiful music. Check that out. I also listed in the material. It's called Adagio for Strings, and the music is so beautiful, and people love it so much that they make it into different versions. One of them is into choir versions, and someone, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's the composer himself or someone else, sets this Agnus Dei text to this vocal version, and it became so famous, and people just love to sing. So this one is very special because it was not originally from any mass or any religious work. So it was an instrumental work and then a vocal version with this text. People love it so much, and this is an a cappella version, and so you have an idea of the whole Mass. Of course, when you really want to stick with one particular work of Mass of one composer, like the Verdi version, like the Mozart version, I don't think it's that easy to digest the whole thing in one go. because at least it goes for at least 40 minutes to 1 hour or so. It's a big work, very big work. And usually they are the choir with a soloist with orchestration, which means the orchestra. So that's why I split it into different composers and let you have a look to give you an idea, because different composers may have a different interpretation of this very important text of the Western culture in their own way. So this is the final part of Mass Ordinary, and this goes to number 6. So let's move on. That's one thing may not be very familiar to all you people is countertenor. Countertenor is a very special role in the music world. They basically stick with the Baroque music. There's a historical reason. Countertenor, which means the male singing in female register or female tone. So of course you can imagine it's all head voice, but it's not that easy because you have to sing in certain volume and tone. You need certain support. So this is a quite different system than other singing voices like a soprano, like a tenor, like a baritone. So countertenor means that because in the old days, till the early 19th century still, there was castratos. Castrato means castrated men. Usually, they were castrated in teenage year, maybe even earlier, so they can still hit puberty and have the physical situation of a man, but they preserve that children voice, and you cannot believe it. They were the leading roles and most welcomed voices in those days. Even they still, of course, exist for a long time, and it kind of stopped starting in the late 19th centuries, I think, and that's why eventually not castrated men became countertenors if they like to practice that voice. And this number 7, it's one of the most famous singers nowadays. His name is Yarovsky. I believe he's Russian, and this is one of his most early and famous performance. So it goes to number 7. So now we go to another term. It's called oratorio. Oratorio in Chinese we call 神剧. So that's kind of like a cantata, but oratorio is always religious. There's always a religious setting, or religious story. So this British composer Handel is famous for his oratorios. He wrote quite several important oratorios in history. So this is sung in English, of course, and there's a version. You can see this Baroque orchestra with the countertenor and with the choir. So this is something we have merged so far. So it goes to number 8. So after that, there's another term called Vesper. And actually we mentioned that in the previous lesson. In the opera chorus section, we had seen one bell chorus, if you still remember. It's maybe number 3 or number 4, I forgot. So Vesper is a prayer conducted around early evening, I believe. So in Chinese, it's called 晚祷，晚上的祈祷。就是这个也没有多晚了，大概就是晚餐前，大概日落的时候， around sunset, not really that late. Should be before dinner. So it's Vesper. So this very famous Russian composer Rachmaninoff, famous for his piano works and also several religious work. Indeed, so there's a set of songs in Vesper for the chorus. So this is OP 37. So finally we see an OP, the opus. So Rachmaninoff used OP. So this is number 2 of the whole set of OP7. Very beautiful music. So this goes to number 9. So basically, this is the end of classical music. So, of course, we can talk about this repertoires for 2 semesters or even more. But I would say for this course, this is one important, but one of the sections only, because the world is so big and the world of music has already developed for 400 years of time, and nowadays there are so many varieties and different cultures all around, even in the world of chorus music only. So there are a lot other things we have to experience. So at least you have an idea how exactly chorus music in classical styles are like. I try to introduce you in a very superficial way, and I hope kind of give you a very abstract idea of how it is. So to conclude this section, I give you a very meaningful and very fun to watch version. It's by the King Singers. I think you watch it like in the lesson 3, one of the finest a cappella group so far, I would say. And that's a one very meaningful composition by a composer called Paul Drayton. That it's a medley, actually. It's a medley for to combine the styles of some, not all, some significant important classical styles and composers, and into one single piece of music. And very fun is that the lyrics is the name of the composers, and they totally merge into the significant style. And hope you enjoy. And starting next lesson, we are going to watch and listen different kinds of music. So it goes to number 10.